stop, Professor, it will stop. But only if you keep drinking.
Don't make me.
I'm sorry,
Don't.
sir.
You may have noticed that my Episode 9 review for Star Trek Picard is late. There's a very simple reason for this. I did not want to watch it. The thought of watching it filled me with dread. This was not the existential dread I would feel as a child when Star Trek episodes involved the Borg. No, this was the kind of dread you feel when you're lying in bed at night and your dog comes into the room making that peculiar half-cough, half-choke sound they make immediately before they vomit all over your shoes. I know that the last episode is coming out this week, so I could not put off watching it any longer. So like ripping a Band-Aid off, I watched it. It is the beginning of opening the mystery boxes from Kurtzman, from Metalis at this point. And as usual, they are either empty or just plain dumb. I don't know what kind of internal review process they have, but it is failing them. We find the answers to many questions that we didn't particularly care about. We see situations botched comically badly. And I think one line from the recap of the previous episode sums up not just this episode, but the writer's attitude towards the entire show.
All that matters is that we are together once more, because I need you.
In universe, he's speaking to his compatriots. But it's also something of a Freudian slip, a hidden message to all of us. The assumption is that all they need to do is put familiar faces on the screen, and like Pavlovian dogs, we will return, and we will watch it, and we will be grateful for what they provide. And it doesn't matter if what they provide is nonsensical. All that matters is that they put in front of you familiar sights, familiar people. I think they've given up trying to bring in a new audience with this. This is member-berry pandering at its finest. But if you watched this without the nostalgia, I don't think it would connect. I will try to keep this brief. The show is not worth more time than a brief recap. You could talk for hours about the technical deficiencies, but once again I will try to limit my criticism to the writing deficiencies. The episode opens with Deanna Troi looking inside Jack Crusher's head and panicking because there's this red door. Why red? Because Kurtzman. And through the red door she sees the Borg. Okay, so the central conceit of the episode is that Jack Crusher is a new type of biological Borg. That when the Borg assimilated Picard, they embedded a new biological transponder thingy in him that he would pass on to his children. And that's why the Borg need Jack back, because through him, through his ability to influence others, they can instantly assimilate anyone that they've genetically modified to be receptive to his signals. We saw in Voyager that the Borg are willing to play a long game with raising children, Icheb and the other children. So why would they only make one? The whole driving ethos behind the Borg is redundancy and uniformity and expansion. The reason that they wanted Picard specifically was he was the captain of the flagship of their next target. He was not unique and special to the Borg, he was unique and special to the humans. And so by grabbing him in advance of the Battle of Wolf 359, they could better demoralize, better break the resistance they faced. So why make your entire plan for making another run at the Federation contingent on the one that got away managing to procreate, and then you managing to track that child down? It would be far easier for them to simply create their biotransponder, biotransceiver, on a cube fully under their control. But that's only the beginning of this episode's trouble. You see, they immediately botch handling the situation. Picard goes to break the news to Jack about what they discovered. He brings 2 security guards with them, somehow thinking that that would be sufficient. And they tell Jack that they're going to send him off to Vulcan to have some Vulcans poke around in his head. He, of course, takes this badly, and being the sane, rational person that we've seen throughout the entire series, immediately decides to turn himself over to the Borg. I think when the writers were envisioning the season, they had some epic set piece at the end. And along about episode 7, they realized that they were halfway through, and none of the pieces were actually where they needed them for that set piece. They could have had a small strike team come in and successfully take Crusher. They could have retooled the entire season to make it make sense that he would end up in the hands of the Borg. But instead, they make him an absolute chump, because they only have 1 episode left to try to put the pieces where they need to go, and that's the best they can do given the time they've left themselves. So with no way to track Jack down, they make a mad dash to Starfleet headquarters to try to warn Starfleet of what's coming. Down in the med bay, Crusher and LaForge figure out that the Borg can auto-assimilate anyone that's gone through the transporters and is under the age of 25. I find it hilariously ironic that Dr. Pulaski's fear of the transporters, that was a critical plot element in one of the episodes of Season 2, comes back all these years later, that she was right to be scared of the transporters, that the transporters can alter the very essence of who you are as you pass through them. Be that as it may, they could immediately notify the bridge to have everyone under 25 report to their quarters and lock them in immediately, but they don't. Why? I don't know. Sure, they do find it out a little last minute, but they just sit on the information. They don't even make the attempt to warn the bridge. So they arrive at Starfleet headquarters, just in time for the ships to all turn on their automation, including the Titan. They've known for several days about the fact that they couldn't go near any other Federation ships without the Titan revealing their presence, but they didn't bother to try to disable that before arriving. They brought back another character just to destroy her. Commander Shelby is now an admiral. She's in charge of the fleet operations for the day, and she gets taken out like an absolute chump as well. The idiocy continues. They quickly realize they've lost control of their ship as most of their crew is young. Okay. So they get into the turbo lift and they try to fight their way off the ship, realizing eventually that they can get to the maintenance deck that's, because of the skeleton crew, largely empty, in order to get to a maintenance shuttle and leave. Great. As they're riding down in the turbo lift, Picard announces over an open comms that's definitely been compromised where they're going. This would have been the opportune time for a coded message where he could say something that to his friends would make it clear what he really meant, while not telling their enemies exactly where to find them. Despite already being in the turbo lift on the way down, when they arrive on the maintenance deck, the people from sickbay, LaForge and company, are already there. Don't think about how the logistics of that work. Just roll with it. And moments later, the young crew members show up. Funny. You might think that they were told exactly where to find the fleeing refugees. A firefight breaks out and Captain Shaw gets hit. Of all of the new characters, his was probably the least objectionable. But as they are weathering this heavy fire, Shaw gets hit by the last round of a salvo, and everybody stops shooting. And the flow of the entire scene grinds to a halt, so that they can give him this big dramatic death scene. And I realized I simply don't care about what happens anymore. The dread is gone. The feeling of illness while watching this is gone, and I am simply laughing at their incompetence now. Despite Shaw being mortally wounded, Commander Hansen and the new character from Starfleet Intelligence decide to stay behind. Why? There's no more enemies for them to fight, because they conveniently stopped arriving after killing the one character they were sent to kill. I can only assume that it's a simple matter of putting all the pieces in place for their epic conclusion to the series, and they need 2 people on the ship for the final episode. Once again, they could have simply retooled that Raffi and Hansen were cut off, unable to get to the shuttle in time. That could have been as simple as actually providing additional people for them to fight so that they would actually be needed to allow the shuttle to escape. Despite having announced their intentions on the intercom, despite the Borg having full control of the ship, the maintenance shuttle leaves and doesn't immediately get snagged by a tractor beam. When Jack's shuttle left, he didn't immediately get snagged by a tractor beam. It's not that they don't remember that tractor beams exist. They used one to throw a rock in an earlier episode. So they take their maintenance shuttle, and Geordi has one last idea. They return to the Fleet Museum, where in secret he has rebuilt the Enterprise D. This actually could have been a neat idea. As he points out, the Prime Directive wouldn't let them leave the saucer section on the surface of Viridian 3, so they brought it back up. The first obvious choice here would be to have them use the saucer section alone. It's warp capable. He could have restored it, and that would be a neat callback to the very first episode of The Next Generation, where they split the saucer section and send it into warp. Now, in that episode, the saucer section was trying to get the civilians to safety, and even that makes sense, given that the saucer section would be trying to provide safety for the civilians on Earth. But no. Instead, he says that he had to cobble it together, that the engines and nacelles came from some other ship. I haven't checked to see if that other ship was also destroyed or what happened to it. There is the minor issue of the entirety of the lower deck being missing, given that it exploded on the original Enterprise. Not just the engines and nacelles. But that, too, is not the biggest problem here. First, when they needed to get back and rescue Riker off of Daystrom Station, you're telling me that they had a fully functional ship that they could have put a cloaking device in that would not have immediately triggered the alert for the tied together computer systems, that they could have pulled out the Enterprise there and then. Second, the Fleet Museum should have a reasonable complement of crew. I understand that it's heavily automated and so on, but when they stole the cloaking device out of the Bounty, Geordi warned them that Starfleet would be on its way because they would have triggered an alarm. And despite how carefully Starfleet apparently cares about all of their ships, he spent 20 years rebuilding the Enterprise D with no one noticing? As an aside, when the fleet gets captured by the Borg, when it gets assimilated by the Borg, They turn and they attack the starbase. Starbase, presumably, has a similar crew composition to any of the ships. How and why is it that the starbase did not immediately fall under the Borg control? They play it as this moment of dread that, oh no, they're going to destroy the starbase. But it simply raises questions that they don't bother to answer. I think that's sufficient to show the nature of the episode. We've got one left. I don't even dread it. I don't care. I will watch it for completion's sake. And I will have to watch it promptly as my extended free trial that Paramount offered is expiring soon. I am considering whether to come back for Season 2 of Strange New Worlds. I don't particularly want to, but if there's sufficient interest, or if the usual suspects come out lauding its praises too, then I will have to take a look. In the meantime, we get a lot of criticism. We're regularly told that we peddle hate, we peddle anger and disdain for new shows, new movies, just for the clicks. Or that we simply hate everything. That we're looking for an excuse to be down about entertainment. I would love nothing more than for good Star Trek, good Star Wars, new IPs, something worth reviewing. But without anything new coming out. So I decided to find something positive to review, something worth watching, something worth recommending to others. I considered hitting the highlights of old movies, but I decided I wanted something new, something I haven't seen before. So I picked one of my favorite actors, Cary Grant, and decided to watch the entirety of his body of work in the order they were released. And I will be releasing reviews for each one. I'm thinking one a week, in addition to whatever I do commenting on current productions.